The white lace of my wedding gown felt suffocating, not because it was too tight, but because my chest was caving under a pressure I couldn't name. The church bells outside were still echoing through the air, the music of joy and promises. But inside my dressing room, the silence after the reception had an edge like broken glass. I should have been basking in the glow of the happiest day of my life, 28 years old, and finally marrying the man I loved, but instead, my hands shook as I stared at the gaping emptiness of the bridal safe. $200,000 gone. The savings I had carefully built the wedding gifts entrusted to me, everything had disappeared as though swallowed by the floor. My reflection in the gilded mirror looked foreign eyes rimmed with disbelief makeup smudged by tears I didn't remember crying. I stumbled back against the vanity clutching at the edge for balance. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, the confirmation of the suspicion that had gnawed at me for months, the nightmare that finally walked into daylight. My parents had taken it. I knew without needing to see the evidence, but the evidence was there anyway, hidden cameras carefully installed days before now burning inside my mind with the memory of what they had captured. My father's deep voice joking as he lifted the envelopes. My mother's delicate fingers rifling through the safe as if she owned it. My younger brother Derek laughing under his breath, saying I wouldn't even notice not tonight. I pressed my hand to my mouth, choking back a scream that would have shattered the thin walls. The scent of roses and champagne clung to me, but beneath it was the bitter taste of betrayal, the metallic sting of knowing the very people meant to protect me had chosen to rob me instead. Outside the door, guests toasted under chandeliers, oblivious to the theft unfolding in the shadows of my wedding. I remembered the moment earlier that night when my parents hugged me, pulling me close with smiles stretched too wide, congratulating me as though I were finally worth celebrating. My father whispered, "You've done so well for yourself, sweetheart." My mother's eyes glistened as she adjusted my veil as if she were proud. It had almost fooled me, the warmth, the gentle touch. Almost, but I had known better. I had known them all my life. The cameras had been a Mark's idea. My fiancé, now my husband, was an engineer who believed in evidence over suspicion. He had said softly weeks before, "If they try anything, Vanessa will have proof. Evidence never blinks." I had laughed then, uneasy but grateful, never imagining how quickly his foresight would save me. Now, as I stood in the wreckage of what should have been bliss, my heart pounded with a rhythm that was not just grief, but rage. $200,000 wasn't simply money. It was the years of sacrifice, the extra shifts, the sleepless nights, the part of myself I had denied, so my family could always lean on me. And on the one day, meant to be untouchable, they had reached into my chest and stolen it. The twist, the only thin thread keeping me upright, was that they didn't know the cameras had seen everything. They thought they had outsmarted me, that I was still the obedient daughter, the sister who would swallow pain in silence. They had no idea that this time I had prepared. This time I was ready to let the world see them for who they were. I closed the safe door gently, as if tucking away the corpse of my trust. My gown shimmered under the dim light, fragile and radiant, a costume for a woman who no longer existed. The music outside swelled again, the guests chanting my name, but all I could hear was my mother's laugh on the hidden recording, sharp and cruel, as she slipped the last envelope into her purse. I straightened my back, wiped my tears, and fixed my veil. If they wanted to play games, I would let them believe they had won. For now. Because the footage waited and justice was no longer a dream. It was a loaded gun in my pocket, cold and undeniable. Tonight my wedding had been the stage of betrayal. Tomorrow it would become the theater of their downfall. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a small 2-story house that smelled like lemon cleaner and reheated leftovers, but the walls of that house held a hierarchy more rigid than any royal court. From the very beginning my role was written. I was the reliable one, the fixer, the girl who carried responsibilities on her shoulders, while my younger brother Derek was the chosen one, the golden child whose mistakes were smoothed over with excuses and whose victories, no matter how small, were celebrated like holidays. I was 6 when I realized the rules weren't the same. I brought home a perfect spelling test, clutching the paper in my little hands, hoping my mother would smile. She glanced at it, patted my head absently, and said, "Good. Now set the table." 2 weeks later, Derek came home with a ribbon from a fun run where he placed ninth. The family gathered, clapped, took photos, and my father said, "This is just the beginning for our boy." That pattern repeated itself through the years like a song stuck on loop. At 10, I won the regional science fair. No celebration. At 11, Derek made a papier-mâché volcano that barely erupted, and my parents invited the neighbors over to see it. When I graduated high school top of my class, my parents said, "You're supposed to do well. Vanessa, it's expected." When Derek scraped through with a C average, my father threw him a barbecue party in the backyard. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I did. Or at least I tried to. I wanted their approval. I hungered for it like sunlight, but the warmth was always angled toward Derek. I remember birthdays most vividly, maybe because they were milestones where the favoritism was impossible to hide. On my 16th birthday, I asked for driving lessons. Instead, I got a cake from the grocery store and a card with $20 inside. 6 months later, when Derek turned 16, he got a brand new Jeep with a big red bow in the driveway. I remember standing at the window, my palms pressed to the glass, watching him jump into the car, my parents clapping proudly beside him. That was the night I whispered to myself, "You are invisible here." The older I grew, the clearer the divide became. Derek didn't just receive more, he was shielded. When he skipped classes, my parents defended him, saying he was creative, misunderstood. When I worked 2 part-time jobs in college, they sighed and said I was too ambitious, too cold. They said it like ambition was a flaw, while laziness was charm. Derek wanted to study abroad in Spain. My parents emptied savings for his trip. I earned a scholarship to New York University, and they told me if you really want to go, you'll find a way to manage it yourself. So I did. I took student loans, worked nights, tutoring, ate ramen until my stomach ached, and carried myself through. What stung the most wasn't even the financial imbalance. It was the silence. My achievements were invisible, not just to my parents, but to the world they invited into our lives. No framed certificates on the wall, no proud anecdotes at family gatherings. At Thanksgiving dinners, my mother would gush, "Derek just has such a big heart, he's so good with people." Meanwhile, I sat across the table, my law school acceptance letter burning a hole in my purse, unmentioned, unseen. I learned young that love in my house was conditional, measured in how much you fit the narrative my parents preferred. Derek fit. I didn't. So I compensated. I studied harder. I worked longer hours. I sent home money when bills piled up. Maybe I thought if I sacrificed enough they would notice. But the scale was rigged. Every sacrifice was absorbed like water into sand, disappearing without trace, while Derek's smallest effort was amplified like a symphony. By 25, when I had a steady job, an apartment in New York, and savings inching upward, I had accepted the truth. Nothing I did would ever tip the balance. Still, when my parents called, I answered. When they asked for help, I gave. When they said, "You're lucky you're so strong, Vanessa, your brother isn't built like you," I swallowed the sting. Love, even lopsided love, is hard to abandon. That history, those years of favoritism and dismissal, were the soil that fed the betrayal at my wedding. The theft of $200,000 wasn't a sudden storm, it was the harvest of seeds planted long ago. And as I stood in my gown, staring at the emptiness of that safe, I realized with a clarity that split me open I had never truly been their daughter. I had been their resource, their fallback plan. And Derek had been their son. By the time I was 18, my sense of duty was ingrained deeper than my own reflection. While Derek breezed through adolescence cushioned by excuses and applause, I was the one quietly holding the family together. When my parents' credit card bills spiraled out of control, it was me who took on tutoring jobs, babysitting gigs, anything that paid enough to cover groceries. My father would pat me on the shoulder and say, "You've always been so responsible, Vanessa. Your brother just isn't like that," as though responsibility were a flaw, a punishment I had been born to endure. College in New York was my escape, but escape didn't mean freedom. Tuition, rent, and books loomed like a mountain, and while other students partied, I worked. Nights at a campus cafe, weekends grading papers for professors, summers juggling 3 jobs. My body ached, my eyes burned, but my bank account grew one careful dollar at a time. I told myself it was worth it, that someday this relentless sacrifice would buy me independence, dignity, a future where I didn't have to live in Derek's shadow. Still, no matter how far I went, the family's reach stretched with me. My mother called one winter break, voice sugar sweet, "Your father and I need a little help with the mortgage, just until tax season." I wired $3,000 money I had meant for tuition. Spring semester I lived off canned soup. Later, my father needed help fixing his truck. Then Derek wanted to borrow money for a down payment on an apartment he never held on to. Each time they promised repayment. Each time I told myself they'd come through. And each time, silence was the only response. When I tried to talk about it to explain how hard it was to stretch myself so thin, my mother's voice turned cold. "You should be grateful, Vanessa. You're capable. Derek needs us more." As if my competence had cursed me to permanent servitude. They called me ungrateful if I hesitated, dramatic if I complained. Gaslighting so subtle and consistent that I started to wonder if maybe I really was selfish for wanting to keep the money I had earned. By 23, I had a master's degree, a career at a reputable firm, and savings that barely scraped six figures. I was proud, but even then my pride was fragile. My parents rarely asked about my work. When they did, it was framed as, "How much are you making now?" Not, "Are you happy?" Derek, meanwhile, drifted from job to job, his failures softened by excuses. The economy is tough. He's still figuring himself out. They didn't see the irony that the economy had been brutal to me too, but I fought tooth and nail while he lounged in safety nets woven from their devotion. Every milestone I reached came with invisible asterisks. First promotion. My father grumbled that I worked too much, that no man would want someone so career-obsessed. First apartment. My mother sniffed that I should have moved closer to home to help more. Even my engagement to Mark was dismissed. "He's fine," my mother said coolly, "but are you sure he's not just after your money?" The sting of those words cut deep. For years, they had treated me like a piggy bank, yet suddenly they dared to cast suspicion on the man who respected me enough to stand by my side. And still I gave. Not because I didn't see the manipulation, but because I hoped that one day, if I gave enough, if I carried enough, maybe they would look at me the way they looked at Derek, eyes, bright voices, proud arms, wide open. Hope is a dangerous thing when tied to family. It makes you ignore the obvious. That hope, twisted and fragile, is why I set aside $200,000 in savings for the future, for stability for my wedding, for a foundation to build a family of my own. But to my parents, to Derek, it was never mine. It was theirs, waiting to be claimed like fruit ripening on a tree they had planted. They never said it outright, but I saw it in their eyes whenever money came up. My savings were not my accomplishment, they were a resource, and in their minds, family meant resources were shared. Shared meant taken. What I didn't know back then was that every sacrifice I made, every dollar I let slip away without protest, was training me for the ultimate betrayal. My family had grown so accustomed to taking from me that when my wedding day arrived, the line between love and theft no longer existed in their minds. To them, emptying the safe wasn't betrayal. It was tradition. It was entitlement dressed as affection. But to me, it was the breaking point, the final theft that snapped years of blind loyalty. By the time Mark and I began planning our wedding, the whispers of unease inside me had already grown too loud to ignore. At first, it was small things, the kind of details that would have slipped past me if I hadn't spent years learning to watch for patterns. My mother began asking about the budget in ways that didn't sound like curiosity. "How much did you save? Sweetheart, weddings are so expensive these days. Surely you've put aside quite a bit." Her tone was too casual, her eyes too sharp, scanning my face as though she could read the balance directly from my skin. When I brushed her off with vague answers, her smile tightened into something brittle. Then there was Derek. My brother had a way of speaking that always carried arrogance, even when he pretended to be joking. One evening as we gathered at my parents' house for dinner, I overheard him on the porch laughing into his phone. "She's loaded. 200 grand easy. You'll see. My folks and I will make sure it doesn't go to waste." The words dropped like stones into my stomach. He never saw me standing in the kitchen doorway, frozen with a dish towel clutched in my hand. I could have confronted him right there, but I knew how it would play out. He would deny it, My parents would rush to his defense, and somehow I would be painted as the villain for eavesdropping. The deeper we sank into wedding preparations, the clearer the deception became. My father started offering to help with logistics he'd never cared about before. "Where are you keeping the gifts? Do you want us to store them safely at our place?" He said it with a chuckle, but his eyes lingered too long on the envelope box. My mother insisted on handling the guest list so everything runs smoothly. When I told her Mark and I already had it covered, she pursed her lips, muttering something about me not trusting her. Mark noticed too. He had the kind of mind that caught details, the kind of patience that listened beyond words. One night after my parents left our apartment, he sat beside me on the couch, his arm heavy around my shoulders. "They asked about the safe again, didn't they?" he said quietly. I nodded, fighting tears. He didn't say I was paranoid. He didn't tell me to give them the benefit of the doubt. Instead, he met my eyes and said, "If they're planning something, let's make sure we're ready." That was when the true planning began. Together, Mark and I combed through our accounts. We moved the bulk of our savings into a separate trust, secure and untouchable, leaving only the $200,000 in the bridal safe. It wasn't an accident that the figure was round, tempting just enough to feel like a prize. It was bait. Mark called it a decoy, a test. I called it insurance for the day I feared most. But even with those precautions, the days leading up to the wedding were heavy with tension. My mother hovered during fittings, making remarks about how expensive the gown must have been. My father made jokes about how a daughter's dowry should be shared with the family. Derek smirked whenever I mentioned money, as though he held a secret I wasn't smart enough to see. Each comment was a pinprick small enough to dismiss individually, but together they bled me of peace. The night before the wedding, as Mark and I rehearsed our vows in the quiet of our living room, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget to bring the envelopes to the church tomorrow. We'll keep an eye on them for you." My stomach twisted. I didn't respond. Instead, I showed the message to Mark, and his jaw tightened. "It's tomorrow," he said simply. "They're going to try tomorrow." I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside our window. Memories played in loops. Derek's smirk, my mother's probing questions, my father's false laughter. Every sign pointed to the same truth. They were going to betray me on the day I needed them most. And still, part of me hoped I was wrong. Hoped they would surprise me. Hoped that for once in 28 years, they would choose love over greed. Hope is a stubborn thing. It lingers even when evidence stacks like bricks around your chest. But deep down beneath the ache of denial, I knew. The clues weren't whispers anymore. They were alarms. And as I drifted into a restless sleep hours before my wedding, one thought followed me into the darkness. Tomorrow will reveal everything one way or another. The morning of my wedding, the sunlight poured through the curtains like liquid gold, but to me it felt sharp, almost accusing. Every bride dreams of that day, the lace and flowers, the laughter of family, the promise of a new chapter. For me, that morning was a battlefield dressed in roses. I sat on the edge of my bed in the bridal suite, the weight of my gown pooled around my feet, and I knew with chilling certainty that this wasn't just a wedding day. It was the day my parents and Derek would try to strip me of everything I had worked for. Mark knocked softly and stepped inside, adjusting the cufflinks I had given him as a gift. He saw my face before I spoke and knelt down in front of me, taking my hands. "It's today, isn't it?" he asked, voice steady but edged with steel. I nodded, unable to form words. He squeezed my fingers. "Then we don't run. We prepare." That had been his philosophy from the start. Mark believed in building walls before storms, not after. It was his idea to install the cameras, his idea to move our savings into a secure trust, his idea to leave only the $200K decoy in the bridal safe. "If they cross the line, Vanessa," he had whispered weeks earlier, "we won't just suspect. We'll know. Evidence never blinks." Now, with the hours ticking down, that plan became my armor. While the makeup artist fluttered around me while my bridesmaids adjusted flowers and fussed with ribbons, I thought about the small black lenses tucked discreetly into corners of the bridal suite and the safe room. They would watch everything, silent witnesses immune to excuses. My parents might laugh, Derek might deny, but the cameras would remember. My mind flashed back to all the times I had swallowed my voice, all the dinners where I bit my tongue while Derek boasted all the nights I wired money home because my parents claimed to be desperate. I had let them rewrite history, painting me as cold, ungrateful, while they cast Derek as the fragile dreamer. But not today. Today, if they dared to take what was mine, the truth would be undeniable. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The veil framed my face, softening my features, but my eyes looked harder than I'd ever seen them. Determination settled over me like armor. This was no longer about money. This was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had let them chip away for nearly 3 decades. The priest's assistant poked his head into the suite, announcing that guests had begun arriving. The murmur of voices floated up the hallway, laughter music, the scent of roses drifting in. My heart clenched. Weddings were supposed to be celebrations, not tests of loyalty. Yet here I was calculating betrayal in the midst of vows. Mark kissed my forehead before leaving to join the groomsmen. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone this time." The warmth of his words steadied me. For the first time in years, I realized I had someone in my corner who believed me without question, who didn't dismiss my fears as paranoia. I opened the bridal safe one last time before the ceremony, staring at the neatly stacked envelopes and the decoy bundles placed carefully inside. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with anticipation. I whispered into the silence, "If you do this, Mom, Dad, Derek, there will be no coming back." The music swelled outside as the ceremony began. My father would be walking me down the aisle in less than 20 minutes, smiling like the proud parent he pretended to be. My mother would dab her eyes with a tissue, whispering about how beautiful I looked. Derek would smirk from his seat, restless, arrogant, already thinking of the envelopes waiting upstairs. They didn't know that this time I was no longer the obedient daughter, the silent sister. This time the trap wasn't theirs, it was mine. As I slipped the veil over my face and adjusted the bouquet in my hands, a calm, unlike anything I'd felt before, washed over me. I wasn't just a bride. I was a soldier walking into a battle disguised as a celebration, and whether the world knew it or not, today was the day my family would finally be unmasked. The church bells tolled as if the whole town had gathered to witness not just a wedding, but a coronation. The marble floors gleamed under the light of chandeliers, every petal on the white roses arranged with precision, the air thick with the perfume of hope and expectation. Guests streamed in wearing their best clothes, voices rising in a chorus of laughter and congratulations. To them, it was a celebration, a love story about to reach its pinnacle. But to me, standing hidden behind the oak doors in my gown, it felt like walking into an elaborate theater where the actors wore masks that only I could see through. My father arrived first at the dressing room to escort me down the aisle. He was dressed in a tailored gray suit, his tie neatly pressed, his silver hair slicked back with pride. He looked every inch the dignified patriarch, but when his hand closed over mine, I felt only the chill of manipulation. "You look stunning, Vanessa," he said, his voice warm enough for anyone outside the door to hear. But when he leaned closer, I caught the faintest whisper, "Don't forget the envelopes. Your mother and I will keep them safe." He pulled back with a practiced smile as though nothing had passed between us. Moments later, my mother swept into the room, her emerald dress glittering with sequins. She clutched her pearls as tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh, my baby girl," she gushed, fixing a stray curl of my hair. "We're so proud of you." Her words should have been a balm, but I caught the quick flicker of her gaze toward the safe tucked discreetly behind the vanity. The way her hand lingered on my shoulder was too deliberate a reminder of the control she still thought she held. Derek appeared not long after uninvited into the bridal suite, swaggering in with a grin that bordered on insolence. "Big day, sis." He smirked, his voice low so only I could hear. "You won't even notice if a few things go missing today, right? You've got a husband now. You don't need all that cash." He laughed at his own cruelty, adjusting his cufflinks before sauntering out. My bridesmaids exchanged confused glances, but none of them knew the full history, the layers of favoritism that had carved me into someone perpetually cautious. I forced a smile, adjusting my veil, and stepped into the hallway. The music swelled, violins playing the first notes of the bridal march. Guests rose to their feet as the oak doors creaked open and I walked forward, bouquet in hand, every eye on me. To the crowd, I was radiant, the embodiment of joy. To myself, I was a soldier in disguise, my heart pounding in time with each step, each vow, each promise. Mark waited at the altar, his expression soft and steady. His presence, the anchor that kept me from crumbling. As I reached him, our hands touched, and I felt strength surge into me. Whatever happened behind the scenes today, I wasn't facing it alone. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, the kiss sealed. The guests erupted into applause, rose petals scattering like confetti. My parents clapped the loudest. Derek whistled obnoxiously, and from the outside looking in, we were the perfect family. But beneath the laughter and toasts, the trap was already in motion. Hidden cameras tucked into corners and disguised in bouquets watched silently. The safe upstairs sat waiting, stuffed with decoy envelopes, its door latched but not locked. I could almost hear the ticking clock counting down to betrayal. During the reception, I caught glimpses of them. My father excused himself from conversations, too often glancing toward the staircase. My mother whispered to Derek, their heads bent close together, their expressions sharp and calculating. When they thought no one was looking, Derek slipped upstairs, his phone in hand. Minutes later, my parents followed. I danced with Mark, forcing laughter for the crowd, but inside my chest a storm raged. Every fiber of me wanted to run upstairs to stop them to scream. But I held still, remembering Mark's words, "Evidence never blinks." If I interrupted now, they would have excuses, denials, manipulations. I needed the footage, the undeniable proof that this betrayal wasn't a misunderstanding, but a choice. The band played on guests, raised their glasses, children twirled on the dance floor, and above us, in the shadows of the bridal suite, my family crossed a line they could never uncross. I lifted my champagne flute, smiled for the cameras flashing around me, and thought, "Dance now, laugh now. Tomorrow, the world will see you for what you are." While the guests clinked their glasses downstairs and the band played a jazz tune that seemed to float through the chandeliers, my family was upstairs rewriting the meaning of betrayal. The hidden cameras caught everything. Later, when I watched the footage, I would see it in chilling detail, but even in that moment, some instinct told me what was happening above my head. Derek went first, swaggering into the bridal suite as though he owned the place. He checked the hallway, pulled the door closed behind him, and whistled under his breath. He approached the safe like a thief in a movie, but there was no fear in him, only entitlement. He bent down, spun the dial, and with the combination my parents had pried out of me weeks earlier, under the guise of helping, he opened it easily. The door swung wide, revealing neat stacks of envelopes, carefully arranged bundles of cash. His laugh was low and cruel. "Jackpot," he muttered. Minutes later, my father entered his footsteps, measured his face calm as though this were just another family chore. He clapped Derek on the shoulder. "Hurry up, your mother's covering downstairs." He reached into the safe himself, thick hands scooping envelopes and shoving them into a briefcase. He even joked about how heavy it was. 200 grand is more than she'll ever need. She's got Mark now, it's our turn. Then came my mother in her glittering emerald dress, pearls shining the picture of elegance and maternal pride. But on camera, her mask slipped. She dug into the safe with manicured fingers, checking each envelope, sliding them into her clutch with alarming efficiency. She laughed a sound that would replay in my nightmares. Poor Vanessa. She'll be too busy smiling for photographs to notice. It's better this way. She doesn't know how to manage money, not like we do. Derek deserves a chance. The three of them stood together, huddled around my open safe like vultures circling a carcass. Derek counted the bundles, my father zipped the briefcase, my mother reapplied her lipstick in the mirror as though nothing had happened. Then they slipped out one by one, merging seamlessly back into the celebration below. To everyone else, they were radiant parents, proud and glowing, and a mischievous brother enjoying the party. To me, they were criminals, their betrayal hidden under sequins and champagne. I didn't see the theft directly that night, not in real time. Downstairs, I was still smiling for photographs, still greeting relatives who hugged me and said how beautiful I looked. I danced with Mark, posed with bridesmaids, cut the cake, all while the knot in my stomach grew tighter and tighter. My intuition screamed at me that upstairs everything I had built was being stripped away. It wasn't until the end of the reception, when I returned briefly to the bridal suite, that my suspicions became certainty. The safe sat slightly ajar, the latch imperfectly closed. My breath caught as I opened it fully. Empty. Every envelope gone, the shelves bare. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the vanity for support. My heart pounded in my ears, my gown felt suffocating, and my vision blurred with the sting of tears. $200,000, my sacrifice, my future, my independence erased in one evening by the very people who should have been my protectors. I sat there for a moment, the noise of the reception muffled through the floor, the scent of roses and cake and champagne turning sour in my throat. A scream clawed at the back of my throat, but I forced it down. They thought they had won. They thought I was still the obedient daughter who would swallow her pain in silence. But this time was different. This time, the cameras had watched. The truth was recorded in black and white with sound sharp enough to cut through any denial. I wiped my tears, straightened my gown, and stood. I walked back into the reception with my chin high, a smile frozen on my lips. No one noticed the tremor in my hands. No one saw the rage burning behind my eyes. My parents raised their glasses to me. Derek winked from across the room, and the photographer snapped another picture of a perfect family moment. But I knew, and soon so would everyone else. Tonight they thought they had stolen from me. Tomorrow they would learn what it felt like to be stripped bare in front of the world. The morning after my wedding should have been a quiet exhale, a moment of coffee shared with my new husband, the beginning of something new and safe. Instead, it was the day the mask was torn away. I woke before dawn, the remnants of laughter and betrayal still echoing in my ears. Mark was already awake, sitting by the desk with his laptop open. His face was pale but steady as he turned the screen toward me. "They did it," he said softly. I leaned forward, and there it was. My family caught red-handed. The footage showed every smirk, every whispered joke, every careless hand scooping up the savings I had poured my life into. We sat together in silence, watching the betrayal unfold in real time. My mother's laugh was the worst of it, the way she called me poor Vanessa with a tone that dripped disdain. My chest tightened, tears stung, but beneath the pain was a heat I had never let myself feel so fully before, rage sharp and focused. "They think they won," I whispered, my voice shaking. Mark reached for my hand, his thumb brushing against my skin. "Not anymore. Today you show them." By noon, I had arranged a meeting. I told my parents and Derek to come to the villa where Mark and I were staying after the wedding. I framed it as a brunch, a chance to celebrate privately, just family. They arrived in their polished robes, smiling as if nothing had happened. My father wore his casual golf shirt, trying to look relaxed. My mother carried a bouquet of leftover flowers from the wedding, pretending to be sentimental. Derek sauntered in with sunglasses, yawning as though he were the star of the show. We gathered in the living room, the sun streaming through tall windows, casting light on the mahogany coffee table between us. I sat across from them, Mark at my side, my laptop already waiting. My parents began their performance, my mother exclaiming how beautiful the ceremony was, my father raising a toast with orange juice. Derek sprawled on the couch, grinning. "So, sis, big day yesterday. Bet you're feeling generous." That was when I pressed play. The screen flickered to life and the room shifted in an instant. There they were on video, every angle captured, every word clear. My father's voice saying 200 grand is more than she'll ever need. My mother's laugh, "Poor Vanessa." Derek's mutter, "Jackpot." The footage was undeniable. The air in the room thickened, silence punctuated only by the sound of their voices on the recording. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the screen. My father's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish caught on land. Derek scoffed, leaning back, trying to mask fear with bravado. "So what? You set us up. You think this makes you clever." I leaned forward, my voice cold, sharper than I had ever allowed it to be. "What this makes me is free. For 28 years, you've treated me like a bank, like a servant, like someone too stupid or too desperate to see the truth. But I see it now, and the world will see it too if I have to press one button." I gestured to the laptop. "This isn't just footage. This is evidence." My father stammered, "We were only trying to help Derek. You've always been stronger." "Stop!" I cut him off. My voice trembling not with weakness but with fury. Do you hear yourself? You robbed me on my wedding day, and your excuse is that I'm too strong to be hurt, that I don't deserve my own sacrifices because he does. My mother began to cry, clutching at her pearls, her tears falling too fast, too rehearsed. Vanessa, darling, we didn't mean— You meant every word I said flatly. The cameras don't lie, and neither do your voices. Derek slammed his fist against the armrest. You're not going to the cops. You wouldn't dare. Family doesn't do that. I looked directly at him, the brother who had been handed everything while I scraped for scraps. My voice was ice. Family doesn't steal $200,000 from a bride on her wedding day. You stopped being my family the moment you opened that safe. The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents sat frozen, their faces pale masks of shame and fear. Derek's arrogance faltered, his smirk collapsing into something brittle. For the first time in my life, I saw them powerless. And for the first time, I felt powerful. Mark reached over, closed the laptop, and placed his hand over mine. They know, he said simply. And they did. They knew their reign of entitlement was over. The silence after the video ended was so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were pressing in. My parents sat stiffly on the couch, my mother's mascara bleeding into smudges, my father's hands trembling against his knees. Derek paced like a caged animal, his jaw-tight eyes darting between me and the door as if calculating escape. But there was no escape left for them. I slid a thick folder across the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Inside were the documents Denise, my attorney, had helped prepare affidavits, financial statements, and a preliminary police report ready to be filed. My voice was calm, steadier than I expected as I said, "You have 48 hours to return what you took. Every cent. Or this folder goes straight to the authorities. Theft, fraud, trespassing, it's all here. And the cameras have already backed up the footage to 3 secure drives. Even if you destroy my laptop, it won't matter. Evidence never blinks." My father's face hardened, but it was a brittle mask. "You wouldn't do that, Vanessa. We're family. You'd ruin our reputation, your own blood." I leaned forward, letting years of swallowed words sharpen into a blade. You ruined that the moment you emptied my safe. You ruined that when you decided Derek's comfort mattered more than my dignity. Don't you dare put this on me. My mother tried a softer tactic, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we were only thinking of your future. You're married now. You don't need to carry this burden alone. We just thought—" I cut her off, steel in my tone. "No. You thought I'd never fight back. You thought I'd let you take from me like I always have. But this time I was ready. That money was never the real treasure. It was a test, and you failed spectacularly." Derek scoffed, throwing his hands up. "What kind of psycho sets a trap for her own parents? You're sick, Vanessa." I turned my gaze on him, the brother who had been handed the world while I bled for scraps. What kind of son laughs while stealing from his sister on her wedding day? "You call me sick. Look in the mirror." His smirk faltered, his bravado cracking at the edges. Then I dropped the final twist, the one they hadn't seen coming. The money in that safe was a decoy. Every real dollar Mark and I saved is secured in a trust legally untouchable by anyone but me. What you stole was bait, and now you've handed me proof of your character, proof I can take to court if I choose. My father's face drained of color, his lips parting in shock. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. Derek cursed under his breath, his bravado collapsing into something close to panic. For the first time, they realized they hadn't just stolen, they'd been played. Mark, who had been silent until then, finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting. "You thought you were clever. You thought Vanessa was still the obedient daughter who would never dare challenge you. But you underestimated her. You underestimated us." I looked at each of them in turn, my voice low but firm. "This is your one chance. Return what you took, and I won't press charges. Fail, and I will. And when I do, the community you care so much about impressing will see you for who you are. Thieves who robbed their own daughter on her wedding day." The weight of my words settled like a guillotine above their heads. My mother began to sob in earnest, whispering Derek's name as if invoking him could undo the damage. My father pressed his hands together, muttering about mistakes and misunderstandings, but his eyes were clouded with fear. Derek lashed out, knocking over a glass on the coffee table. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. I met his glare without flinching. Try me. The ultimatum was set, the battlefield lines drawn. For once, I wasn't the one cowering, explaining, or justifying. For once, the shame wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. And whether they returned the money or faced the law, one truth was now unshakable: I had taken back control. As the sun dipped lower outside the villa windows, casting the room in gold and shadow, I felt something I hadn't known in years, power unshaken and unapologetic. My parents and brother, once towering figures of authority, now looked small-cornered, exposed. And deep in my chest, where grief had lived for so long, something new stirred. Justice. It was close, so close I could taste it. They left the villa in silence that day, my parents clutching each other as if they could shield themselves from the truth, Derek storming out with curses dripping from his mouth. For a few hours, I almost convinced myself they would do the right thing, that the shame written across their faces meant remorse. But hope had always been my weakness. By the next morning, it was clear nothing had changed. Instead of repayment, I received messages first. My father's carefully worded email calling the incident a misunderstanding, insisting they had only moved the money for safekeeping. He wrote, "We were worried you might be overwhelmed with so many financial responsibilities at once. We were trying to help, as if help came in the form of theft." My mother called repeatedly, her voicemails swinging between pleading and scolding. "Vanessa, don't destroy this family over money. Think of your brother, he needs a chance. You've always been so strong, can't you bend just this once?" Each word was acid, blaming me for the very wound they had carved. Then Derek left his own message venom wrapped in arrogance. "Go ahead, take it to court. Everyone will laugh at you for suing your own parents. You'll look crazy selfish. Nobody will side with you." His voice cracked halfway through, though betraying the fear he couldn't hide. Mark and I sat at the kitchen table listening to the recordings one by one. I pressed my palms flat against the wood, grounding myself. "They still don't get it," I whispered. "They think this is about money." Mark shook his head, his jaw tense. "That's all it will ever be to them. But for you, it's about dignity, about truth." He reached for my hand. "You're not alone in this anymore." 2 days later, Denise filed the complaint. The police called my parents in for questioning, and suddenly their tone shifted. My father appeared at my office uninvited, his voice low, trembling. "Please, Vanessa, drop this. Your mother can't sleep. Derek is under so much stress. We'll give you the money back, just don't make this public." His hands shook as he spoke, the same hands that had scooped my savings out of the safe with no hesitation. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You should have thought of that before you laughed at my expense." His shoulders sagged, defeat written in every line of his body. For the first time in my life, I saw my father not as a giant, but as a man small and afraid. The fallout spread quickly. Relatives who had toasted us at the wedding heard whispers, then saw headlines when the local paper picked up the story. "Bride's family accused of theft on wedding day." My mother stopped showing her face in public, ashamed, or maybe just afraid of judgment. Derek tried to bluff through it, but his friends deserted him, unwilling to be tied to scandal. The reputation they had prized for decades crumbled in a matter of days, not because of me, but because of their own greed. I thought it might feel sweet watching them fall. In a way it did, but mostly it was sobering. This was the price of betrayal, not just money lost, but respect, trust, the very fabric of family unraveling. My parents had chosen Derek so many times over me, and now that choice was laid bare for the world to see. Their tears came too late, their apologies too thin. Late one evening, I received a letter slipped under my apartment door. My mother's handwriting trembled across the page. "We're sorry. We thought we were protecting the family. We love you, even if it doesn't seem like it. Please forgive us." I read it once, twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into a drawer. Forgiveness might one day come, but reconciliation would not. Some bridges burned too completely to ever be rebuilt. As for Derek, he was charged not just for the theft at my wedding, but for credit card fraud Denise uncovered during her investigation. The smirk that had defined his face for years disappeared the day he was led into the courthouse in handcuffs. I didn't go to the hearing. I didn't need to. Justice was already unfolding, and his downfall was his own doing. Standing by the window that night, watching the city lights shimmer, I realized the shift was complete. They had lost their grip on me, their hold built from guilt and obligation. And in their place, I felt something new: freedom. They had taken so much from me, but in the end, it was their loss that was irretrievable. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle, though the scars would remain forever. My parents attempted one last reconciliation, a dinner invitation delivered through an aunt who begged me to show mercy. I declined. Mercy had been my entire life with them: mercy when they dismissed my achievements, mercy when they drained my bank account, mercy when they treated me as invisible. This time, I chose boundaries instead. Mark and I moved forward together. We took the funds from the trust, the real savings they never touched, and bought a modest but beautiful home in Santa Barbara, a place where the ocean breeze washed away the residue of betrayal. The house wasn't just walls and windows. It was freedom personified. Every corner echoed with the sound of choice, of building something that was mine and mine alone. One of the first things we did was open the doors to people who understood, friends and colleagues who had been silenced or manipulated by family in their own ways. Out of those conversations came the seed of an idea, a nonprofit that would help young women establish financial independence away from toxic family structures. We called it Bright Futures, a name that felt like reclaiming something stolen. At the launch dinner, as I spoke to a room full of women who nodded with tears in their eyes, I felt pride swell in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. My story mattered, and it was helping others find their voice too. Meanwhile, my parents' world shrank. They stopped attending social gatherings, too ashamed of the whispers that followed them. Old friends kept their distance. Derek's criminal case dragged on, and though he avoided prison with a plea deal, his record was tarnished, his reputation in ruins. He called me once from an unknown number, his voice hoarse. "You ruined me," he spat, but I only shook my head, staring out at the Pacific waves. "No, Derek, you ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." I hung up before he could answer. There were nights I lay awake replaying it all. The cameras, the confrontation, my father's trembling hands, my mother's tearful letter. Some part of me would always ache for the family. I wished I had the parents who might have chosen me for once. But grief is different from regret. I didn't regret the choices I made. Cutting them off wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Mark often reminded me gently that we were building something better. He would hold me close and say, "Look at us. They tried to ruin our beginning, but they only made us stronger." And he was right. Our marriage wasn't shadowed by their betrayal. It was strengthened by our resolve to never repeat it, to create a home where love wasn't conditional, where support wasn't a bargaining chip. One afternoon, as I unpacked boxes in our new house, I found the folded letter my mother had written buried among old papers. I read it again, her words pleading for forgiveness, for me to believe she loved me. For a moment, my heart ached. Then I placed it in a fireproof box, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. A reminder of what I had overcome, of what I would never allow again. Healing is not neat. It is jagged, slow, and unpredictable. Some days I felt like I was soaring. Others, I felt the weight of loneliness press in. But in each step, I reclaimed more of myself. I went to therapy, I journaled, I poured energy into Bright Futures. Slowly, the ache lessened, replaced with a quiet strength. And on our first wedding anniversary, standing on the balcony with Mark watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson, I realized something profound. They had taken $200,000 from me in illusion, but in truth, I had taken everything from them that mattered: their control, their secrecy, their ability to define my worth. I lifted my glass and whispered almost to myself, "This is what freedom tastes like." Mark heard me, smiled, and clinked his glass to mine. The ocean roared below, steady and eternal, and for the first time in my life, I felt eternal too. Not in the sense of forever, but in the sense of finally belonging to myself. My parents had taught me many painful lessons, but the most valuable was this: family is not defined by blood, but by love, respect, and choice. And I had finally chosen mine. Looking back, it still feels surreal to think my wedding day, supposed to be the beginning of joy, became the final page of a toxic chapter I had carried for 28 years. The photographs show a glowing bride, the videos show laughter and champagne. But the truth behind those images was far darker. The truth was betrayal disguised as parental love, a theft cloaked in false smiles. Yet, strangely, I don't regret any of it, because that day, painful as it was, gave me clarity. It stripped away illusions I had clung to for too long. I no longer waste time waiting for my parents' approval or Derek's respect. They had their chances, thousands of them, and every time they chose greed, favoritism, and manipulation. In the end, their downfall was not orchestrated by me alone. It was the natural consequence of their own choices, their own words caught on camera, their own hands reaching into a safe that was never theirs. My only part was refusing to stay silent anymore. To the outside world, it might look like I destroyed my family by exposing them, but families are not destroyed by truth. They are destroyed by lies, by betrayal, by the kind of selfishness that corrodes bonds until nothing remains. All I did was shine a light into the shadows, and when I did, they shrank back, unable to stand in the glare. Now my life is no longer defined by being the strong one or the invisible daughter. I am simply Vanessa Turner, a woman who survived betrayal and built something better. Bright Futures continues to grow, helping women establish independence, giving them tools I had to learn the hard way. Every story I hear from them of gaslighting, of stolen savings, of parents who put one child above another reminds me that I am not alone. There are countless others who carry similar scars, and together we are proving that scars can be turned into shields. As for my parents, I don't know if true regret ever bloomed in their hearts or if they simply mourned their tarnished reputation. Derek has disappeared into the margins of gossip and legal records, his arrogance swallowed by the reality of consequence. I don't follow their lives anymore. I don't need to. My peace does not depend on their suffering or their redemption. My peace comes from walking away from choosing my husband, my friends, my new family built on love and respect. If there is one thing I hope my story teaches, it is this: love without respect is not love at all. If your family belittles you, drains you, manipulates you, that is not family, it is a prison. And the key to escape is already in your hand. All you have to do is choose to use it. I know many of you listening have carried your own betrayals, some too heavy to speak aloud. Maybe you've been the one always overlooked, always asked to give while others take. Maybe you've been told you're ungrateful for wanting boundaries, dramatic for demanding respect. If so, hear me clearly, you are not alone and you are not wrong. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Walking away is not betrayal. Sometimes it is the purest act of survival and the bravest form of self-love. On the night after my wedding, when I stood on the balcony with Mark the Pacific wind in my hair and the stars sharp above, I felt lighter than I ever had. My parents thought they had taken everything from me, but in truth, they gave me something priceless: the courage to finally cut the cord, to finally define myself on my own terms. They handed me the freedom I had always longed for, disguised as a theft. And so to anyone watching this, I leave you with this: family is not blood. Family is not obligation. Family is who shows up with love, respect, and truth. If you have that, treasure it. If you don't build it yourself, that's what I did. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you? How did you find your strength again? Share your story in the comments. I promise you'll find a community here that understands. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more. Because sometimes the stories we tell are not just our own, they are lifelines for others still waiting to escape. Justice may take time, but when it comes, it is worth every second, and healing, though jagged, is possible. If I found it, so can you.